All right, let's see how this goes. I'm a bit of a pacer and I find myself with a fairly small area, so this is going to be an interesting experiment. I'd just like to say, first of all, thanks to the organising committee for the invitation. I was very pleased to accept and to be able to air really to an audience that is outside of my partner, this idea that I've been having for quite a while. And so I wanted to sort of share that with you now. Some of this is going to seem fairly intuitive. Some of it you might look at and go, well, that just is good common sense. What I find is sometimes these ideas come about and nobody's actually thought of them before to look at something in a particular way. And so that's what I've been doing. One of my main areas that I'm involved in, which involves stalking, is actually an area that I've called applied crime analysis. Now, it's a that you look at a single case study and you try to figure out what's happened in that case. You're not necessarily interested in looking at something like a homicide and trying to figure out what happens in general in homicides. What you're trying to do is look at this homicide and figure out what went wrong here. And so I've just published another book on this particular area, and that's coming out in June, available wherever all good books are sold, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so why would we look at something like this? Well, obviously from the first sort of instance, crime is something that is generally well researched because we need to know what the problems are to be able to deal with them effectively. We all know, living in Queensland, that the devil at the moment are the outlaw motorcycle gangs. At least that's what we're being told. And this has ostensibly come from attention that's been paid to them from a few notable instances. However, the research into the problem says that the OMCG groups cause probably about less than 1% of crime. Estimates are about 0.6% of crime. So it's probably not the problem that we think it is. But we use research into crime to drive public policy. It allocates funds for things like victims groups, it increases police spending to put more police on the beat, and it also helps dictate the allocation of other resources. For example, do Get Tough on Crime strategies work? The answer is no, they really don't. What they actually do is they increase the crime rate, because what we do is we take away opportunities for people once they get out of prison because they carry more of a stigma of being an offender. So this is the kind of research we rely on to help us make educated decisions about public policy. Some of the more recent stuff we've seen on the Gold Coast, obviously Polair 1, they announced the other day that we're getting a second Polair. I'm just going to go, I'm not a gambling man, but I'm going to assume it might be called Polair 2. The other thing that we've had on the Gold Coast is Operation Seymour, which was a 1-month-long targeted police blitz on the Gold Coast to effectively deal with our crime problem. I don't think that happened within the month. In fact, I think we're probably back to where we were previously. But that was basically an attempt to address the public's perception that we actually had a crime problem that we really didn't have. Now, there was a presentation given by the police minister and a few other members. It goes for approximately 30 minutes, and at about 28 minutes and 30 seconds, one of the gentlemen claimed that, I'm not going to stand up here and bore you to death with the numbers. I'm not going to tell you that there's not a problem on the Gold Coast, but what I can tell you is that there's a public perception that we have a problem, and we're here to deal with that perception. Okay, so that's actually what Operation Seymour was, for those of you who perhaps may be familiar with the operation but not familiar with the rationale or the reason behind it. So we use research really to give us an idea about what's going on in a community and how to dictate the allocation of resources into that problem. And I'll go over in a little bit more depth in a minute about the two ways that crime is really being researched or examined. One of the other things that we can use crime research for is to actually assuage the public's fears that there is a crime problem. When the Gold Coast had that period a couple of years ago, starting with the shooting death of Constable Damien Leading, there was a period in time which the media came to call 4 shootings in 4 weeks. And it got a lot of press attention. What we didn't hear of in the Gold Coast was that in Sydney they had 12 shootings in 12 weeks. But we never heard about that, because the media was saturated with our 4 shootings in 4 weeks. These were not random shootings. All of these shootings had a background to them. One was involved a police officer responding to an armed robbery call. The other three, there was some pre-existing tension between the protagonists in those particular events. Random shootings are a very, very rare, and stranger shootings are a very, very rare event. What the research tells us is about 3/4 of the time you're probably going to be killed by somebody you know, and it's probably going to occur in someone's home. So people walking down the street don't really get shot randomly that often. It just doesn't happen. One intrepid journalist at the time was to do a public survey of mothers at the 4 shootings in 4 weeks, and was to ask the question, do you feel safe letting your children play in the front yard? And the response was, no, we don't. We are actually concerned that one of our children might cop a stray bullet meant for somebody else. And a journalist rang me about an interview I'd done at the time saying there wasn't really a crime problem, and he was very frustrated with me. He said, we've just proven that people are worried about doing this kind of stuff because kids are going to be playing out, doing all the kind of play that Bruce talked about out in the yard, scooters and picking up piles of junk, and someone's going to get shot. And what do you say about that? You're saying there's not a crime problem on the Gold Coast. What do you say about that? I say, given that the research into the victimisation of children shows that children are more likely to be harmed in their own home by a family member, they are safer playing in the front yard. Okay. So we try to present a realistic picture to the public by crime research. Now, the problem is, crime research doesn't always tell us how to answer a real-world problem with a single case. Crime research presents an abstract, or from Jewish mythology, a golem, a creature that is a single creature that's composed of a number of different parts. And so what we have in applying crime research to single case study problems is some characteristics or features apply and some characteristics or features don't. And so what we need is a way to analyse criminal events to answer questions about what went on in that event. And that's where sort of the applied crime analysis stuff comes in. So if I've got a stalking case or a homicide case, and sadly lately more often than not they've been homicide cases, looking at the general research on homicide might tell me a little bit about what I need to know, but it won't necessarily tell me what happened in this case. It won't tell me what happened between these 2 people or these 3 people in this home at this point in time. Sitting down with the actual case material does. So the theory might give me, or the research might give me a starting point, but it doesn't give me any answers. The answers come when you examine the case material. So really there's 2 ways that we research crime. One is the broad general stuff, and we call that nomothetic, and that relates to group study. Okay, so it tends to provide abstract answers, answers that may or may not apply in a given case. The other way is through an idiographic analysis or a single case study. And so one of the things that I've actually started doing here at Bond is changing my assessment methods and moving away from examinations, because all the research says that they're fairly arbitrary. They don't benefit students, they actually benefit lecturers because they're easier to mark. So I've started moving away from that and moving more towards case study-based reasoning. And what that means is that students in my classes get to work on the same cases that I've worked on. So they work on stalking cases, they work on homicides, they work on risk assessment cases and threat management cases. Because that's how we learn to analyse crime. We don't learn to do that by reading the research and finding out what the numbers are. We learn to analyse crime by analysing instances of crime, because then we get to know what actual features exist within these cases. Okay, so bridging the gap was really what the applied crime analysis stuff was about. And I guess one thing that I forgot to mention is, because this is the first time I've really aired this beyond my partner or sitting down at my computer and talking to myself, is here, and so realistically you guys are basically guinea pigs, I think is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so about 6 months ago I got an email, which is not unusual, from a guy in the Netherlands saying, we would like you to write a book chapter, excuse me, we'd like you to write a book chapter on crime research problem. And I went, it's ridiculous. And then I sat down and went, hang on, it's actually a pretty good idea. So this idea, this was a seed that was planted by Michael, and when we agreed and we said, yeah, this is what will be in the chapter, he came back and said, well, great, because now you can write a second one for our other book. So what we're doing is putting this together the idea behind crime as a research problem. Realistically, he was asking for how does the area of forensic criminology utilise research? And I remember sitting back thinking to myself, forensic criminology is not really concerned with research into general crime problems. Forensic criminology is concerned with single case study. And then I thought, but hang on, the research process has a lot to teach us about single case studies. There's still a lot we can learn, even though what I'm trying to do with the applied crime analysis is distancing ourselves from the research, or pure research using inductive logic, which is based on probabilities and possibilities, moving more towards deductive logic, which is hopefully based more on certainties and the evidence in a given case. So that's what we were trying to do. All right, that's the cover for the new book that comes out in June. And I started to do some, obviously, you know, as a writer and author, one of the things you try to do is see if what you're looking at's been done before. And so I was going through the books and I found that it hadn't really been done before, that nobody's really looked at it this way. And so I thought, well, that's great for me because it means I don't reinvent the wheel or have somebody else say, oh, excuse me, but we've already done that. But it was bad for me because there's no real foundation of where to start. So this is something where the seeds, we kind of just had to water it occasionally and look at how it was growing and the idea was developing. So no one's really defined this yet, crime as a research problem. No one's really done it. People research crime and they've never really looked at it this particular way, and so that's what we're trying to do. When you do searches on this stuff, whether it be Google Scholar or on your university databases, what people talk about really is research methodology, and we're not really interested so much in the research methodology. Rather, we're interested in what can we borrow from the area of research to the understanding of single case study crime analysis, and that's really what we're interested in there. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the research process. This was very arbitrary. There's 50, 60, 70, maybe even more journal articles that all give their little own research process. The decision of which one to pick was entirely arbitrary. Identify the problem or question, review the literature, clarify the problem, specifically identify the purpose of the study, define the population and develop the plan, then go out and collect your data and analyse your data and present your findings. Okay, so this is from an education research book. So that's really, and most of the research process stuff that's out there's actually following along very, very similar steps. Obviously, you've got to collect data before you can analyse data and stuff. So the actual format of this is fairly intuitive and fairly common. Okay, so let's have a look at the applied crime analysis process now. All right, what we're really doing here is a systematic process of examining a single case in an attempt to understand that case in a great deal of depth. Now, if you do this properly, you will know more about that case than any other single person on the planet, if you do it properly. You will know more than the police officers who investigated it because they investigate their own little universe of the case. They might be interviewing suspects and stuff like that, but they don't know about things like physical evidence. You get to know about everything. So, all right, identify the problem. What is the act under investigation? Is it a stalking case or is it a homicide case? Is it a risk case or a threat management case? What exactly are we looking at? Can we actually know anything? Is there enough information or evidence for us to actually provide an analysis? Review the literature. What's common or typical? Does this crime fit within a reference group, or is it so unusual that it doesn't actually fit within any of the extant literature on the subject? Clarify the problem. What can we actually do? We can look at validity, reliability and sufficiency. Validity refers to accuracy. Does the information mean what we think it means? Reliability is a trust issue and sufficiency is about quantity. Do we have enough information? Define terms and concepts, because when we do this we establish thresholds. So if we say what's the motivation here, we define what we mean by motivation. Staging, I'm getting a red screen. Okay, so develop the plan. What data do we have to base an argument on? How will we approach the problem or question? Collect data, we examine the evidence, we analyse the data. What does the data tell us about the case that we're looking at? What does the evidence tell us? And then we report the findings. So the crime analysis process, the applied crime analysis process, is exactly the same as the research process. So it would make good sense to basically steal some ideas from researchers. So why do we do this? We learn from research methods, we establish thresholds for examination, because in research there are very strict thresholds that exist for how far you can take the findings. So what we do is we borrow from that. We reinforce the importance of the scientific method within our processes, and we maintain a rigorous approach to problem solving that's based on good science and not assumption. But perhaps best of all, we can look at studies and research problems that have been investigated. We can look at the problems that they encountered and then try to avoid them in our own understanding of the case that we're actually looking at. So I know I went about a minute over. Thank you for your perseverance and for giving me the opportunity to get this out of my head and into a larger audience.